this before, but I'm thinking of it again this morning. And he says, Curt, I'm a millionaire. If you ever need anything, you let me know. I never did do that, but do you know the peace of mind that brought me? And this morning, church, in our Heavenly Father, we have somebody that's more than a millionaire. And he says, he'll never leave or forsake us. Heidi, Malachi, and I were just talking, what can we do during these times but pray? And it seems like that's so little to do. But yet, it's assuring us that our God is there with us in these times when we tend to want to feel discouraged and disheartened and abandoned. We're not. We're not. Press on. Faith is the victory. We need to keep that in mind. That was free of charge right there. That has nothing to do with the sermon today, but it was just something I wanted to share, something I thought needed to be said. We'll be in Genesis 12, continuing thoughts on Abraham, which I'm enjoying this study of Abraham. I think it's relevant to us. It's right where we are, really in our faith walk of looking at our Father in faith and getting those lessons that we can from his life, not only his victories, but his mistakes as well. And that's so valuable to be able to learn from somebody else's mistakes. We had a friend share Elijah. We're spending some time with an old schoolmate of mine's dad, and he's a Christian fellow, and he was sharing with Elijah. He says, Elijah, I'm doing the same thing with my grandsons. I'm teaching them things that I've made mistakes on where maybe you won't. Now, as we look at Abraham's life here, we can look at not only his victories, but his mistakes, so perhaps we won't make the same mistakes. The faith walk is perhaps going well. Maybe you're even newly baptized. You begin a new life in Christ. You're on fire for Jesus, but at any rate, you're walking in his will. But faith needs refining. Faith needs testing. Quote, God knows what kind of faith we have, but we don't. Think about that. God knows exactly what kind of faith we have, but we don't. And guess how we find out? Those struggles and trials and tribulations that come into our lives refine our faith and teach us about ourselves. God's purpose in allowing trials is not only to verify faith, but also to purify and to remove, here's that word that gets thrown around occasionally, dross, the impurities of a precious metal. It's like skimming the impurities off the top. Warren Wiersbe writes, like Abraham, as you progress in the school of faith, you will face three special areas of test. Circumstances, which we looked at last week, if you remember, people, and things. Circumstances, people, and things. Our text is Genesis 12 and 13, where at the beginning of 12, we have the Lord telling Abram and setting forth his company with him. Abram, leave your country, your family, go to this land that I'm going to give you, and I'm going to bless you and make you a great nation. Your name will be great. You'll be a blessing. I'll bless those who curse you and curse him and curses you. And all the families of the earth will be blessed. And Abram departed, took Sarah and his wife, and the Lord appeared to Abram and said, to your descendants, I will give this land, down in verse 7. And he built an altar there, and then he moved from there and headed east and then south. And then there was a famine in the land. That famine was us his circumstances that he had to deal with. We all have famines in our lives that we deal with. It might not be a hunger famine as Abram and Sarai dealt with there, but a famine, a circumstance, a challenge. We tend to want to run from challenges. If we don't deal with one challenge and run from it, guess what? Another one soon looming on the horizon. A different one perhaps, but we don't run from one and escape into utopia like we like to think. Here's another one. That's what happened to Abraham. He ran from the famine, but then all of a sudden here he's having to deal with people. Pharaoh and his officers. And we see kind of a downward spiral in Abram's life. But there's a thought I want to touch on there as we look at this idea of running from one problem to another. Philippians 1:6 reads, being confident of this very thing, that he who has begun a good work in you will complete it until the day of Jesus Christ. Once God begins that work in you, he keeps on working on you, even though you might flee one problem and run to another. The refining keeps on going until we either go and meet the Lord or he's going to come back and take us. That refining just keeps on going on, whether we like it or not. A failure may discourage us, but God will continue his work in our lives until we leave this earth. We may think, oh, I blew it. My life's a failure. God really doesn't look at it like that. He's thinking, well, that was one situation. Hopefully they learned something from that. But here's another one that's going to challenge them in a different. Let's see if their faith grew. And they handle this one any better. So Abram went down to Egypt. When our focus shifts from God's plan to the world's allure, and if you weren't here last week, let me review a little bit of Egypt. Stands for the world systems and its allure. They went down. You know, when we leave God's will, we go down to some place. Jerusalem, if we're going there, that's usually referred to in the Bible as going up. So Abram left Canaan, bowed the knee, and went down to Egypt, down into the world system. When our focus shifts from leaving God's plan to the world's allure, we see some things begin to happen. Quote from last week, you're better off in God's will in a famine than a palace out of his will. Pretty good quote, isn't it? Let's read a little bit and recap in our minds some of the things that's going on here in chapter 12. I'll begin reading in verse 11 there. What happened when they came down to Egypt. And it came to pass, verse 11, when he was close to entering Egypt, that he said to Sarai his wife, indeed I know that you are a woman of beautiful countenance. Therefore it will happen when the Egyptians see you, that they will say, this is his wife, and they will kill me, but they will let you live. Please say you are my sister, that it may be well with me for your sake, and that I may live because of you. That verse reminds me of a politician's statement right there. I think there's some hidden stuff in that passage, isn't there? So it was when Abram came into Egypt that the Egyptians saw the woman, and she was very beautiful. The princes of Pharaoh also saw her and commended her to Pharaoh, and the woman was taken to Pharaoh's house. He treated Abram well for her sake. He had sheep, oxen, male donkeys, male and female servants, female donkeys, and camels. But the Lord plagued Pharaoh and his house with great plagues because of Sarai, Sarai, Abram's wife. And Pharaoh called Abram and said, "What is this you have done to me? Why did you not tell me that she was your wife? Why did you say she is my sister? I might have taken her as my wife. Now therefore, here is your wife. Take her and go your way." So Pharaoh commanded his men concerning him, and they sent him away with his wife and all that he had. I want you to note something here as we begin our little saga, if you will, of Egypt. There's something that usually marks Abram's life that we don't see here in Egypt. There's no altars. You notice that? He moved away from them when he left Canaan, went down into Egypt. There's no altars in Egypt. Something happens in our lives as well as Abram when we move away from the idea of worshiping God. As we move away from the priorities of prayer, of meeting at the Lord's table, and all the things that happen when we come together in the Lord's house on the Lord's day morning. All the spiritual things, all the physical things. And then we move into the points of the exact happenings in Abram's life that marks what happened when he moved from Baal-the-Knee to Egypt. Number one, we see a move from trusting to scheming. Do you ever notice that when we begin to move away from God's presence in our lives, in that groove that we sometimes get in of being fully in the Lord and trusting and at ease, even in the midst of a storm perhaps, and we begin to move away from His strength and into ours, we begin to have to scheme and plan and fret and worry to keep our lives on track, and all of a sudden it just turns into a tangled web of us trying to do it instead of depending on God. And we see that there in the, I'll call it the politician's verse that we just shared, as Abram begins to scheme and fret. He says, "Sarah, I know you're a woman of beautiful countenance. Therefore, when these Egyptians see you, they're going to say, 'This is his wife.' And they're going to kill me, but they're going to let you live. But Sarah, if you'll just say you're my sister, it'll be well with me for your sake, that I may live because of you." Boy, that's some tangled up thinking there. And you got to read that 4 times in those 2 sentences just to see what he's saying. Quote, "Faith is living without scheming." It's so simple, isn't it? But it's so hard. Every once in a while, I get up in the morning and I go, "Lord, I'm just going to quit scheming today." It's all yours. But then before long, here we are beginning to fret and worry again in our human strength. We want to take it back. And we begin to scheme and work. It's faith is relying each day on what the Lord has in store for us. What a time, church, for us to model living by faith. Living without scheming. Let me throw a couple of scriptures for us to illustrate this one. Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He shall direct your paths." That's a good life verse right there. Good couple of verses. Over in 1 Corinthians chapter 3. (18, 19, and 20). "Let no one deceive himself. if anyone among you seems to be wise in this age, let him become a fool, that he may become wise. For the wisdom of this world is foolishness with God. For it is written, he catches the wise in their own craftiness. And again, the Lord knows the thoughts of the wise, that they are futile. Just forget about thinking you got it all figured out. God knows what's coming in our lives. He's got it all under control. So the first thing we see in Abram's move down to Egypt or away from trusting God and into the world is beginning to scheme, relying on his own wisdom. A move from trusting to scheming. Secondly, he moved from confidence to fear. Boy, that catches us off guard a lot of times too. We're walking with the Lord, and we've got our faith bolstered up where it should be, and then either some event will trigger our downward spiral, and we begin to worry and to fret. And our confidence just goes out the window. A move from confidence to fear. Again, let me put a few scriptures with this thought. Book of Isaiah, chapter 12, verse 2. Behold, God is my salvation. I will trust and not be afraid. For Yah, the Lord, is my strength and song. He also has become my salvation. Proverbs 29:25 says, the fear of man is a snare. And I have a little reading here. Psalm 112 fits this one so well. And it's worth spending a little time there. I think there's probably a whole message in Psalm 112 because we think about fear, faith. It really fits. Blessed is the man who fears the Lord, who delights greatly in his commandments. His descendants will be mighty on earth. The generation of the upright will be blessed. Wealth and riches will be in his house, and his righteousness endures forever. Unto the upright there arises light in the darkness. That's good. He is gracious and full of compassion and righteous. A good man deals graciously and lends. He will guide his affairs with discretion. Surely he will never be shaken. The righteous will be in everlasting remembrance. He will not be afraid of evil tidings. His heart is steadfast, trusting in the Lord. His heart is established. He will not be afraid until he sees his desire upon his enemies. He has dispersed abroad. He has given to the poor. His righteousness endures forever. His horn will be exalted with honor. The wicked will see it and be grieved. He will gnash his teeth and melt away. The desire of the wicked shall perish. Pretty good song, isn't it? And reflecting on fear. And you know, on Wednesday nights out to Chester Hill, we've been popping into some of Jesus' miracles. There's a lot about faith and fear hidden in them. There the disciples were crossing the boat in the Sea of Galilee. Remember that story? And kerwhoosh, one of those storms came down, and the boat was rocking back and forth. And they woke Jesus up and said, we're going to drown. And he says, oh, don't be so afraid. I've already said we're going to cross over. Where's your faith? Where's your faith? They were scared, weren't they? And then we have Jairus coming to Jesus because his 12-year-old daughter was sick on death's door. And they were on their way to the house. Jesus was going to heal the daughter, and the woman with the issue of bleeding kind of interrupted things there for a healing. And then during that interruption, here come the messengers back from Jairus' house and says, Jesus, don't bother. the girl's dead. No use coming. And Jairus is there taking this all in. And his faith is going mostly at that moment probably down. And Jesus says, Jairus, and may remember the words, don't be afraid. There's that fear thing again. Just believe. Because Jairus had just had the object lesson of the woman with an issue of healing. That's what the whole interruption was about. I think Jesus giving Jairus an object lesson on the power of faith and in believing. Faith and fear. Abram was moving from faith to fear. His confidence was gone. Let me get back to our text. There's another interesting little thing back in Genesis 12 here. You're keeping up with me that we need to look at. There's another little shift here that's very interesting. Look at verse 12 there as he begins to talk to Sarai of what's going to happen. He says, therefore it will happen when the Egyptians see you that they will say, this is his wife, and they will kill me, but they will let you live. You see the main emphasis there on what Abram's focus was. They're going to do this, they're going to do that. Now, go back to the beginning of the chapter there in God's covenant to Abram and notice what the emphasis there in verses 1 through 3. You'll soon see the contrast. Abram, get away from your family, from your father's house to a land that I will show you. I will make you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great. Verse 3. I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse him who curses you. Notice the shift from being scared of what they're going to do to what God says, I will do this. I thought that was interesting. We do the same thing. God said to us, I will never leave you or forsake you. I will not. I will. But we begin to worry, they're going to do this. Thirdly, he moved from others to self. He moved from others to self. Sarah, please say, you're my sister, that it'll be well with me for your sake, that I may live because of you. Abram. There's a passage that I don't particularly like, but it challenges me. Ephesians 5:25 says, husbands, love your wives. That's not the part I don't like. I don't mind loving my wife. Just as Christ also loved the church and gave himself up for her. That's the part I don't like quite so much. I just saw a picture recently that said, I thought love looked like this, and it had a picture of a heart, but I'm learning it looks like this.
There you go.
Very true. Very true. The older I get, I learn more and more what loving my wife means. Gave himself up for her, as pointed out. Abram didn't need to have Sarai in this position in the first place. It was his fault that they were down there in danger. Now she's asking him to save her to save him. I'm getting as tangled up as Abram is here. He moved from others to self. When we begin to scheme and fret and worry, many times we move from others to self. Here's another quote I don't particularly like either. A husband out of the will of God can bring trouble to his wife and family. Guys, God's given us leadership roles with responsibility. We get out of the will of God, we can bring all kinds of trouble upon the family very quickly. Fourthly, Abram moved from bringing blessing to bringing judgment. And if we look at over in the covenant again, he's to be a blessing to the nations. Look at the end of 3 there. And in you, Abram, all the families of the earth shall be blessed. Look at verse 17. Because of Abram, the Lord plagued Pharaoh and his house with great plagues because of Sarai, Abram's wife. He moved from blessing to curse. Quote, if you want to be a blessing to others, stay in the will of God. Pretty simple, but real. I know a fella, and you probably do too, who got out of the will of God and caused grief to those around him. Remember that story? God told him to go and preach at Nineveh. But he ran the other way, got tickets on the ocean liner and thought he was going to run from one problem and escape. And he soon had another problem, doesn't he? The storm come up and the sailors said, who's causing all this grief? Jonah, is it you sleeping down here at the bottom of the ship? What are we going to have to do? We know the rest of the story, don't we? They threw him overboard. Jonah brought a lot of grief on those around him because of his disobedience. That gets real, really quick, church, when you think about it. You know, being out of the will of God, and we think, how many times have you heard, oh, it's just going to affect me. Just me, I'm a grown-up adult, I can do it. And then it spreads, it ripples out, and affects a lot of people around us as well. When you disobey God, the only way to find him is to go back to where you left him, make a new beginning. Look at 13:1. There's a lot hidden in that passage right there, I think. Then Abram went up from Egypt, he and his wife and all that he had, and Lot with him, to the south. He left Egypt, headed back toward Canaan again, back to bow the knee. When you disobey God, the only way to find him is to go back to where you left him and make a new beginning. Abram went back to the land of altars, back to his tents. He left the palace. He went back to being a pilgrim and a stranger in the land. And maybe you're looking at the situation and you're thinking, well, at least Abram come out of it with, look at verse 16 there. Pharaoh treated Abram well. He had sheep, oxen, male donkeys, male and female servants, female donkeys and camels. He got some wealth in the land down there, it seems like. And you're thinking, for it to be a mistake, he came out of it pretty good. But as we head into chapter 13, the third test, we have circumstances, people, and things. It's pointed out that everything Abraham got in Egypt caused him trouble. And we'll unpack that more the next time we get together. We'll see what next week brings. I'm going to have to shift focus here real quick and think about Thanksgiving instead of Abraham. It might be a Thanksgiving message next week when we get together, but a lot of good stuff yet to come. The most practical lesson that I can throw out this morning from all these circumstances and thoughts is, church, never abandon your altar. Stay in fellowship with the Lord no matter the circumstances. That's pretty good. You know, we hear all these little cliches about leaving church. Before long, you won't miss it and all that kind of dangerous ground. We see what happened to Abram and Sarah. There this morning. We need to stay in touch with God. I'll stop right there. Invitation time. Maybe you need to begin that walk with God. Maybe altars haven't been a big part of your life. Maybe worshiping the Lord hasn't been a big part of your life to this point. Or maybe it's time to do something right there personally in your seat and make a recommitment of saying, you know what, I'm going to get more serious about the altars in my life and staying in touch with God and His leading. We all need to do that occasionally. We should. Whatever your need today, take care of it here while we're together as a church. If you need Christ, come forward. Terry's going to come up and do our hymn of invitation now. Come forward if you need the Lord. If it's a personal thing, take care of that. But above all, just worship in spirit and in truth.